Okay, hello everyone. Sorry for that slight technical hitch. It's always very difficult when we have these hybrid events, despite years of practice now. But welcome to our event today, which is focused on transforming early warning systems for global climate resilience. My name is Karina Fernley. I am a professor in warnings and science communication at the Warning Research Centre, which is a joint initiative between the Department of Risk and Disaster Reduction and Science and Technology Studies Department. So we are really delighted to be holding this event today. We've managed to catch Bapon through his travel, so we're really glad that he could be with us today. It seems like a timely day today. I understand there's the small bit of news that Donald Trump's being inaugurated today, so it seems quite apt for us to be focusing our efforts on how we can enhance warmings for climate change and making our environment a better place. So that seems an apt thing to be doing today. But yes, so I'm just going to introduce Bapon, and then he will be giving a presentation, and then we will be having a Q&A sort of discussion with Professor Virginia Murray from UKHSA, who will be in discussion, and then we'll take some questions and answers following that. So if you do have any notes, whether you're online, please pop them in the chat, and if you're in person, make a note and raise your hands. So we try and make this as inclusive as we can between our watchers from far and those here in the room. So it really is a great honour for me to be introducing Dr. Bapon Fakhruddin, who is currently leading the water sector at the Green Climate Fund, and he is overseeing the climate investments across vulnerable countries worldwide. He has over 22 years worth of experience as a hydrometeorological specialist in climate risk assessment and early warning systems. He has had the most amazing experience of designing and implementing multi-hazard early warning systems in over 30 countries, so he brings a huge wealth of experience. And in this talk, he will share GCF's strategic objectives on water security and early warning systems, covering both the traditional approaches to people-centered, impact-based and risk-informed systems. This sounds like one of my lectures right now, so this is wonderful. So we're really, really excited to have you here, Bapon. Thank you so much, and I shall hand the baton over to you. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Karin, and it's been a pleasure to be here today. What I'm going to share with you in my talk, maybe a little bit on the background on the early warning system, or GCF, Green Climate Fund. I don't know how many of you really know about the Green Climate Fund. Can you just hand out? Oh, I see very few. Okay, so we can a little bit talk about the Green Climate Fund. What does it do and how we work? And then we can a little bit share our climate information and early warning system. That's one of our portfolio. We try to support the global early warning system initiatives by the SG on early warning for all initiatives. And then from there on, maybe a little bit discussing like what transformation we can actually bring. What we are talking about the traditional system versus the new way of doing things. Because if the climate change is emerging, we need to think a little bit differently on our business as usual thinking. So what are those things that need to be incorporated if we really want to see a resilience future, or our community who are actually the most vulnerable to support them. And then there are lots of projects. Feel free to go to the GCF website to see how those could be, bring your interest. Am I laudable enough from the last? A little bit more? Okay. So here, just a simple example here. If you look at the hazard profile or hazard situation globally, we just try to look at actually region by region through, the disaster those are happening in region. Still, actually, the hydrometeorological hazard is actually thriving the most. People are actually getting affected in every single region. And then from there, probably the drought, flood, storms are actually leading factor. Those are actually affecting more and more. But also, if you look at the last 50 years of history, there are always actually some initiatives to enhancing the flood, drought, and storm forecasting system. So then why actually people more dying or people more affecting our, damage is more happening. So that need to be a little bit think about that. What are the new way of doing things, or what are the missing links out of the overall systemic approach that are actually not creating an effectiveness into the early warning system. And obviously, when you're looking at the overall situation, that how the systemic cascading, compounding things actually creating a complexity. You maybe saw several actually incidents that happen actually one single hazard actually creating a multiple hazard consequently. And it creates a complexity which actually doesn't have enough capability within the national disaster management entity to how to cope up with that things within a very short period of time, especially on the emergency response point of view. So if you look at on that particular aspect, it's actually quite multidimensional. When it goes beyond like a 2 or 3 dimension, it becomes very complex to understand. So, but when it's actually multidimensional in terms of scaling, looking at the global to reach local, you're looking at the time scale, time horizon from hour to the century. You're looking at the sectoral, that how actually different sector is actually interacting. At the same time, you actually look at interaction between the system. So it makes very complex to understand actually how and where actually we need to be maneuvered and integrated. And often actually, even though we say we all actually working quite closely, strong coordination, but we are actually very silos in our own domain, in our own specialty, in our own ministerial or national government system. So, which then again triggers that if the system is complex, we need to have more money. But if you look at the global scenario on the climate financing or money side of it, we're actually shortage of huge amount of money. So this is the latest report that the SDG has come up with, that we are actually shortage of almost $3.8 trillion. So, and who has those money? Nobody has that money. So that means you also need to think about more smartly how you actually need to work on the finance sector to creating a co-investment platform or catalyzing, all money could be actually come to work together. So that point of view, and then also when you're talking about the climate financing, especially on the vertical climate financing, because when we talk about finance, we think development finance, we also have a climate finance. In the climate finance, you may often hear about the vertical climate financing, which is actually come from the UNFCCC through the Paris Agreement. How many of you heard about the Paris Agreement? Many of you, yeah, that's fantastic. So GCF is one of the mandate agency to implement the Paris Agreement. So that's our mandate through the UNFCCC to the vertical climate financing. And there are 2 other finance work together with us on the vertical frame. It's called Adaptation Fund and Global Environmental Facilities. Other than that, there is also a private financing, it's called CIF, Climate Investment Fund by the World Bank. So these are the 4 vertical finance works on the climate financing field. And obviously, when you look at each of those funds, the accessing those kind of financing has a different modality. So someone has a 3 metrics, someone has a 4 metrics, someone has GCF has a 6 metrics. So how you understand those metrics, like investment criteria to fulfill, to making sure that actually you are actually eligible to accessing those financing. So that means there is still quite a lot of knowledge gaps that how this climate finance work and how to access those financing. And often actually, if you look at your own country, you'll be seeing there's the NDA. Do you know what is NDA? It's a National Determinant Authority, which is either belongs to Minister of Finance or Minister of Environment. And then that works through the NDC, National Determinant Contribution, where you actually try to set up your goal that how much actually emission you want to reduce to achieve the 1.5 degree level, and then that translate into a climate risk assessment to understand your NAP process. You know NAP, right? The National Adaptation Plan. And then based on the NAP, you design your project that, okay, what is my priority in the NEP. It could be water, it could be energy, it could be food security, it could be ecosystem, whatever it is. And then you actually come to those vertical climate financing to access that, okay, energy is my priority, I need to have a solarization, and for that, I'll be reducing this million metric ton of emission, and then we actually try to design a project together with them. But having such kind of things, there is a lot of challenges to accessing financing in terms of innovation practice, how you bring the new innovation, what we call like a paradigm shift, understanding the knowledge, looking at the fragile and conflict countries, because when you have a fragile and economic situation, development, bringing food, those are actually your first priority. And climate change is actually out of the window because you don't have time to think about those things. So then who can actually finance those things, them, or who, because they are also equally vulnerable to climate change. So looking at those aspects, it creates actually quite complex situation to accessing the financing. And that's the reason actually the GCF, we create a catalytic financing. Why we say we are a catalytic financing? Because we not only just provide money through the project, we also provide finance to build the capacity of the national government through the readiness fund, through the incubation, through the capacity building activities. So we are a very country-driven organization. Through the NDA, country can actually access up to $4 million per 4 years to build their capacity building, as well as doing incubation and as well as piloting. And then once they know the climate financing, through those money, they can actually come to us for a large financing. On an average, our ticket size is actually $50 to $70 million. So that means we look at more actually scalability. So if you tested a $1 million project for a good practice, you can actually then design a large project, how you can actually scale it up for the whole country. We are also an open partnership organization. So we are a funder, basically a second due diligence organization. So we don't actually implement anything ourselves. So we actually work through all the partner organizations. And we have more than 200 partners around the world. So it's maybe either the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Water Resources, National Private Bank, so who has actually the capability to managing different financial instruments. So that's how the accreditation is made. And we also provide a range of instruments. So if you look at the way the concessionality works, you go to an MDB or a bank, they have a very fixed interest rate. Whatever you buy a house, you buy a car, or whatever you do. So there is a very fixed interest rate and policy. There's no concessionality comes. But as a GCF, we try to create a market opportunity, and that's why we provide all sort of financial instrument here. So we can provide a highly concessional loan, which could go up to 0% for a 40-year tenure. So that just to creating a market opportunity for climate action. At the same time, we can actually bring you equity funding, guarantor, insurance, whatever the instrument that you think is actually it could create a market opportunity to crowdsourcing other financing or attracting the private sector to come and play a critical role. If you work on the humanitarian side, you may always hear that, okay, private sector need to come and play a critical role. This is a fundamental. I'm hearing last 30 years or 25 years, but we don't actually tell how. It's easy to say, oh, they need to come and work with us, but why actually they need to come and work with us and how they will be working with you. Unless you provide an enabling environment or a regulatory function so that actually they could actually feel safe. As a person, you will not invest your money to buying a share where you can see a high risk. It's obvious, right? We want to see a safe environment where you can actually invest our money so that actually you get a profit. Same for the private sector. And as a GCF, we try to create those kind of enabling environment, policy, legislation, and regulatory function so that actually they can come and de-risk any risk that they see in the market. And then in that sense, we are also a very high risk taker. So our appetite is quite high to taking any risk, to creating an enabling environment, doing some paradigm shift or bringing innovation into the market. And at the same time, we are quite unique because we do a 50-50 balance of adaptation and mitigation. So that's from our board that we need to be manage our 50% project need to be allocated for adaptation and 50% for mitigation project. So mitigation project is easy to do because it has a bankability. But for adaptation project is very challenging because often you don't see the bankability or profit into the adaptation project. And it's very difficult to attract to the market. So saying so, our focus in that sense for the mitigation side, looking at more on the energy, transport, buildings and forest, land use, like REDD+ and many other activities. But on the adaptation side is mostly the livelihood, people and community, water health, food security, infrastructure, as well as ecosystem and ecosystem services. And water play a very critical role connecting everything. Because if you look at any water project in GCF, 50% of it may be a fully water, but rest 50% is actually quite nexus, either water, energy, ecosystem, water, food security, ecosystem, water, infrastructure, food security. So all this actually always mixed. The reason we are saying that we are quite unique, so if you look at all the financing modality globally, so if you look at on the average ticket size versus the risk appetite, you see that GCF is actually sitting on the middle somewhere. So we don't have that much big money like MDBs or philanthropy because they have a huge money or private sector. But our average ticket size, as I said, is 50 to 70 million, which keep us like almost like a middle. But because of our high risk appetite, it brings us quite high position in the market using all sort of instrument. Because even if you go to any MDBs or many other financer, they may only be able to provide you one or two financial instruments, either loan or grant. But there are very few agencies who can actually use like a guarantor, equity, or other sort of instrument to creating a market opportunity into the market. And our ED has been announced last year that she like to mobilize 50 by 30. So that means by 2030, we like to mobilize $50 billion in the market. And for that, we have 4 priority areas that we need to work together. One is looking at more on how we can actually support most vulnerable countries where actually other doesn't design, or maybe a conflict and fragile economy. And also how we can actually bring in the private sector to maximize the investment. And also how we create a partnership models. Because if you really want to do a co-creation or a crowdsourcing of the finance, you need to have a strong partnership so that actually all understand the common systematic approach and how actually every piece of the meal could be connected to each other. And then also simplified approval process, because often you may be here in the market that GCF is very complex. It's very hard to access from GCF. It is complex because it's a large financing you're talking about. So if you go to the World Bank even, you see that a project start may take 3 years because they have a country mission, appraisal, all sort of things. Our average time probably 1 year, 2 months, but we are trying to make it actually 9 months. And then there is also a lot of example that we actually able to mobilize financing in a 6 month. Like last board meeting, we approved a project in Somalia that was actually designed in a 6 months period of time. So, and then also from one of project, a programmatic and systemic approach. So how actually create more systematic approach, like if you're talking about water, how you bring more actually transboundary so that actually you create a more systemic result upstream versus downstream, and as well as midstream together to making the program more coherent and more balanced so that actually it could cover all areas that they need to be attracted. So now coming back to the climate information and early warning system, that's maybe your more core area of interest today. So if you look at our USP, which is like what we're going to do over the next 3 years, 2023 to 2027. So one of our target is actually we'll be supporting 50 to 60 developing countries to enhance their early warning system or establish the early warning systems as aligned with the UNGA Early Warning for All initiatives. And we are actually quite far to reach to that milestone to enhancing the 50 to 60 countries early warning systems. We'll be placing some project into the next board to covering at least 10 to 12 countries. And in the past, we also cover many countries to covering the early warning systems to enhance the early warning system. So far in GCF, we mobilized $16 billion. Not only early warning system, it's actually overall financing. But together with the co-financing, which like bringing other money into the market, it about a $61.5 billion. So which means actually almost like 5 times you actually multiply our financing with the co-financing rate. And then if you look at the GCF early warning portfolios, so as you can see, overall we have supported 59 countries, but also these are some of the targets that we try to put together based on the UNGA SOF countries. SOF means systematic upgradation of the observations network. Cruise is like a WMO cruise initiatives, LDC and SEEDS countries, as well as underserved countries. So we try to balance all the priorities for all the entities to come together, that how as a GCF we can actually support everyone needs together. And total number of projects, so far we actually provided 97 projects, and we mobilized around $1.4 billion into only the early warning systems, and then co-financing is to their $916 million overall. And you can see the distribution. Obviously, Africa went a little bit more than other countries. But when you're looking at the climate information and early warning system, there are so much specific challenges actually they face. So one is actually how you create an institutional mechanism to creating an enabling environment to more effective early warning systems, which is actually still your hydromet actually goes as a silos. So how actually they interact with all the sectors to come up with a sector-based or risk-based decision-making to the whole governmental systems. Does any of our national budgetary plan is actually really based on the risk-based information, or using early warning information? Does they actually make their annual budget? I don't see much in that space. Or does our sector actually change their annual budget every year based on the risk that they face that's going to happen? And then obviously there is a lack of infrastructure, either observation network or even the modeling capability within the hydromet services, as well as other infrastructure. But then also coordination and paradigm shift. As we said, that actually hydromet still actually works very silos, because for them an end-to-end early warning system means they produce a forecast and pass it to their door. That's like end-to-end. But actually that transformation is happening, that they start thinking that last mile warning systems, that how the forecast that generate and how the people react based on the impact, and how actually that could be coming to a feedback loop to them, so that that information could be further enhanced year by year. So those are maybe a more transformation is happening to the countries, but also a limited financing. When you're talking about the climate finance and early warning system, because still again, the hydromet service and then the climate financing is two different things. Unless the NAP describes that, okay, there is a priority for the early warning systems, it's not able to actually eligible to access the financing. But the good part is actually, if you look at the Article 7 into the Paris Agreement and also Article 8.1, it talks about early warning system. So that means it's a fundamental that multi-hazard early warning should be part of the climate resilience things. And good part also is if you look at the NAP, I think almost 60 to 70% NAP is actually quite strongly mentioned that early warning system is actually one of the key instruments to enhancing the climate resilience. So in that sense, actually, they are quite eligible to accessing financing, and we have actually a set of a bandwidth margin to enhance those early warning system. But the most challenging part is actually bankability. You just take as a case study any single country and look at their most frequent hazard. It's not that no investment has been done for early warning system. If you look at over the last 20 years, you may see that at least 10 to 15 project has been put there to enhancing the warning system. But the project ends, it ends there. And then new project comes. So that means there is no such kind of business case scenario to changing the mindset. And there is no also system to long-term sustainability. Not only the programming doesn't sustain because there is no financing sustainability. And also there is a lack of operation and maintenance budget. In many of the hydromet service, if you go LDC or SEEDS, the amount of budget that they have, they cannot actually maintain their observation network. So if you want to upgrade them into more sophisticated, like a Doppler radar or other radar system, they don't have enough bandwidth or money to actually sustain those things for the long run. So how you are gonna actually achieve those is quite critical thinking. And then unless you actually come up with a business model that how the focus could be as a one way is a common goods, people should be able to access it, but also how it could create a revenue generation opportunity, more specific, localized or sector-wise product that could be produced and sellable to those sectors or different government entity within the government, and that could create a more market opportunity. But I think the mindset of ours is still quite far. So what is our vision then for the transformation? So how we can actually create a transformation system? So what we like to see in GCF, because we always do the risk assessment, and the problem with our risk assessment is that it's actually static. We do one time off. That, okay, for flooding, 1 in 100 years flood, this is my risk. For 1 in 50 years flood, this is my risk. But my risk is actually very dynamic because you have a forecasting of numerical weather forecasting or flood forecasting, 1 day forecasting, 7 days forecasting, 15 days forecasting, 24 days forecasting, monthly, seasonal, and then decadal, and then up to the century. So how you can actually see all those products, because each of those products has a different modeling system. But if you look at the result, it's actually same on an X and a Y, because you're looking at actually time versus magnitude in a different model. So can we actually bring all those products into one single platform to understand what is the tendency of those hazard? And then does that actually makes me or our own decision-making system a little bit more easier, that, okay, I can see actually my flood is gonna happen tomorrow, so I do an immediate action. But if I see actually my seasonal forecast is telling me that, oh, there is a El Nino and there could be a above normal condition. So I took a strategic decision. I don't need to do any action at the ground. I do actually more planning that what I can do if that's happened. And then you can observe those things, situation over the year, so over the month. And then looking at that kind of dynamic hazard, how that could help you to understand your physical risk versus transitional risk. But at the end of the day, also you need to understand your monetary value, because what is your loss? Because if you want to go to the policymaker, they always want to know that what is the money you're talking about. So unless you know the loss, you cannot actually create those kind of monetary value. And then the loss modeling is also quite important because there's a new financing now in place for loss and damage financing. So if you want to claim for a loss and damage, you have to have a very good data set to calculate your loss for every single hazard those are happening. And unless you have those kind of data standardization, ontology, as well as platform to storing and understanding, you'll not be able to actually design such kind of things. And then that could give you a understanding what are the potential risks you may have, and then what are the potential mitigation and adaptation measures you should take over the year, 1 year, 2 year, 3 years. To implement this strategy, we have several guidelines. We call like a sector guides. So for climate information and early warning systems, we have a sector guide, which is like a Bible for climate financing. If someone wants to access the finance, they need to look at those guidelines, that where actually our pathway and where we like to financing and how you can actually you design your climate risk versus barriers, and then what are the activity, how you're gonna design your outcomes, output, as well as goal. But also we have a lot of other guidance, like how you do the programming manual, appraisal manual, and also other sectoral manuals. So these are all online. Feel free to download or have a look if you're really interested about the climate financing areas. So the way the pathway works is again the same, that we try to look at the information, how the information could be, based on the advanced science and information, and then how that could be generate a, decision support system for the impact-based forecasting, but also how that helps to the infrastructure design as well as resilience financing to create a market as well as create a risk-based decision-making culture within the sectors. And to design our early warning project, we use the 10 principles because we believe that if you want to design an early warning system, it should be an end-to-end, what we called. So looking at your 10 essential elements, what we used, basically looking at institutional regulatory function, then looking at the Earth observation data set, looking at the regional data, because you cannot only rely on your national database, and then how you do the hazard detection, and then how you come up with your hazard assessment. From there, you design your impact based on the threshold, and then you design your product for different sector or national product, but then it needs to be disseminated. So what kind of technology you use for dissemination, and then the risk communication, because you have a multiple layer of systems, national, regional, sub-regional, local. So how that actually pass through each of the layer with the same consistent information, but at the end of the day, how actually the community reach those information and react and response is quite important. So we try to ensure that actually all the elements are actually equally strengthened into the project so that it ensure a quite robust end-to-end forecasting system for a risk-based decision making. Am I on time? Right. So the other area that you need to look at if you're really interested about the GCF, because we use 6 principles, or we call like a matrix, our investment criteria. So every single project that comes to GCF as a concept, it needs to be ensured that it actually has a quite impact potential, which need to be looked at actually how much emission you are reducing, or how many beneficiaries you are actually supporting, or what are the real impact you're actually creating into the society for that particular project. And then it also needs to be looked at a paradigm shift, that, okay, how you're bringing the innovation into the project, not only the programmatic innovation, but also financial innovation, so that it can actually have a paradigm shift for a climate action. Third criteria is actually sustainable development goals. So we have how many SDGs? 17, right? So how you fit some of those SDGs into the project. And then every single project needs to be recipient needs. So that means it needs to be bottom up. We don't actually prescribe anything top down. So every single GCF project is actually country-led through the stakeholder consultation. But also it needs to have a promote country ownership. So that means which is actually under the NDC, NAP, National Development Plan, or Sectoral Development Plan, that those are exist in the country that need to be reflect. The project is actually priority within those plans. And finally, efficiency and effectiveness, because if you want to invest $1, we always like to see how much actually benefit it's creating. But for early warning system, I think it's quite obvious that on an average is 1:6. So if you invest $1, $6 is obviously a benefit, but in many countries it could go to 40 to 70 per dollar investment. But also we like to see more on the co-design approach actually. So if you have a concept, we always encourage to the entity that, okay, don't send us a surprise concept note. Rather, actually, if you have an idea, send us an email, draw your theory of change, that, okay, how you want to create those activities. And if we both agree together, we can do a right shop or sort of like a consultation together to design, co-create and co-design those things so that it can fast track and fast move to the pipeline to place it to the board for an approval. But also every single project, we also have a step-by-step guidelines. So if you just look at our water sector guide, you will see there is a 3 annexes we actually create to project preparation guidelines, so that actually we try to help countries. What are the step 1, 2, 3, 4 you need to be look at when you're designing your project. But the fundamental is actually your project need to be based on your risk assessment. So you have to do a very thorough risk assessment where risk is a function of hazard exposure and vulnerabilities. However, more often actually people actually do only hazard assessment and they label it as a risk assessment. Sometimes people only do the exposure assessment, they label it as a risk assessment. So there's a lot of terminology and vocabulary challenges actually when you do the risk assessment. So we always try to prescribe that, or look at the IPCC 2013 or IPCC 6 actually, the year 6 actually reports to define your risk assessment. But other than that, we also have several upskilling framework for the early warning system, which is an advantage. As I show the CRUISE framework, like a climate information and early warning system by WMO. So we created a fast track project creation for them. So if you have demonstrated a good practice through the CRUISE project of WMO, country can actually directly come to us to access a fast track up to $25 million to scaling that same project within the country. And that doesn't require all sort of annexes that we necessary for GCF normal project. And some of this project could go within a 6 month to the board for consideration. Similarly, for adaptation funding, we also have a similar upskilling framework. So those are like a fast track SAP projects, short application process for GCF. We also designed a project with 4 pillars, because if you look at the early warning for all, there is a 4 pillar leading by 4 entities, WMO, UNDRR, IFRC, and ITU. And this is the first project we actually bring 4 of them together as a programming for global programming, where we try to look at a priority countries, at least 5 to 6 countries will be demonstrated the full scale early warning systems using a 10 principle. But we also will be helping to the 12 or 13 countries how they can actually generate a pipeline to assess themselves what are the gaps and how they can actually build those gaps so that they are like ready. And it could be financed through the other financing mechanism, because GCF is not only financer into the early warning system. There are bilateral, there are multilateral, there are own country financing is available, so they could actually utilize those based on the good practices on the pillar 3. But also we need a strong coordination so that everyone can be anchored together that what is happening. And that's why you also try to put a enabling condition that how actually you do a global coordination mechanism so that country or other countries can actually come and learn from them to how to do things more systematically and programmatically, plus also thinking a more paradigm shift into the early warning system works. And our strategy is also, for every year, we'd like to see how actually we can progress these things over the next 3 years so that actually we can achieve our milestone for 50 to 60. As I was saying that we'll be placing, because next month we'll have a board meeting and we'll be placing actually at least 8 or 9 countries for board consideration for early warning system enhancement. We are also designing a large project into the Central Asia, which is called like a glacier to farm, which also covering whole Central Asia. So we try to doing all those kind of regional mechanism, how we can actually support the global early warning systems. In Africa, we also supported like AIP, African Investment for Partnership. So design a $6 million last year to design a more comprehensive early warning programming for 20 countries in Africa. Just an example here that how these things transform. So we'd like to see, as we said, that fundamentally is actually how we create a more risk-based decision-making for the sector. So that means you have a hazard, how the hazard actually could create a risk in a dynamic form, and then how actually that risk actually incorporate into their planning strategy as well as budget into sector, and how that could be influenced to the national budgetary plan to allocate it a different level of financing through the national priority. So those are actually, and also decision making for different kind of differential decision each sector wants to take, because each sector is different. Either you talk about agriculture, tourism, water, so they need to take a very differential decision on their own sector. And often hydromet service don't have those kind of expertise. So there is need to be a marrying between the sector expert versus the hydrometeorologist together to design and co-design that what does a above normal means to a farmers at the community, what does 1 meter water means to me as a people living in the coastal areas, am I in danger or am I in safe? So those need to be transformed, and otherwise you will not be internalized or react, because this is a very fundamental for human being. Unless I actually don't understand my risk, I'll never actually listen. So that means I need to internalize, yes, this is my risk. So unless we feel that things very from the heart, we never react. So how can actually we create those kind of information so that actually people really feel those information rather than burn out first and then learn. So that's the intention here. But one other things that we are trying to see actually how we can actually create a more different financial instrument, because so far the early warning systems right now, so 90 or 95% is grant based. All we are paying is actually grant money. But how we can actually create a different blended financing opportunity, bringing the private sector so that actually there is one is the sovereignty rules, that how the government control the overall system, data, and as well as all the privacy. But at the same time, there is an enabling environment for the private sector to come and play a differential product to introduce and create a market opportunity through a government, public and private partnership programming or a private sector programming. So that could create a new way of some financial sustainability and market opportunity for the early warning systems. And that's why actually we are trying to thriving and investing our effort to enhancing those capacity and capability. As we said that we have a different sort of instrument, guarantor insurance, debt, and equity. You maybe see the first debt for climate swap, a project actually we launched ever for the Barbados in the last board meeting for the water sector projects, where we try to reduce the country's debt using a climate financing programming to wastewater treatment plant. But maybe for early warning system, that level we cannot go, but there are actually a lot of opportunity using a guarantor or other instrument, concessional instrument that we have. So we said we have almost 95 projects, so feel free, if you just go to the GCF, everything is actually publicly available. Every single proposal, concept note, as well as many other assessment that we did, feasibility study, gender assessment, those are all actually tagged in our website. So you just go there, search for early warning systems. This is a project that just we announced last COP for the Azerbaijan, because they were the host country, and then we'd like to enhance their early warning system over there. And then The previous board, we actually helped Pakistan. You maybe know that Pakistan has a large flooding in 2022, and it has created for a country a huge debt. And we actually fast-tracked this project to support to flood management as well as ecosystem-based flood management. Two projects, one for $77 million, and this one is actually $15 million project over there. And then also there are, this is a West Africa for multi-country to enhancing the early warning system. So you can have so many references, so many projects, and many of them actually very unique. You'll not find those kind of projects in any other portal or other agencies that we are able to mobilize financing, and many of those results are actually getting through the impact. We are receiving many stories, which is good stories, sometimes also bad stories. But we like to see how those good stories could be actually transformed or shared to the other countries. So I think that's basically the all I like to share, but also feel free to download our 2023 annual report, which also capture a lot of good practices, overall GCF transformation and climate action. So I'm happy to take some question if anyone like to throw. Thank you.
Does anyone have like an immediate question to ask before we go to the discussion?
One question. You talked about... Yes, I'm Bayas Ahmed. I work at UCL, associate professor here. So my question is, you said most of the projects fail because the project ends and then they forget and then they wait for another project. And based on my practical experience, what I understood, let's say you're talking about in one of the least developed countries, the meteorological department, they're responsible for this early alert system dissemination and production. But what I found, let's say there are just only 5 scientists working in that organization, but all these millions of dollars you have invested, that's going through some NGOs and large organizations. And I saw like one NGO working in developing some early warning system. They have like 30 experts, okay, working like with this multi-million project. But the ultimate organization, the National Meteorological Department, they have 5. So after 5 years, your project ends, but they don't have the capacity, the human resource and skilled human resources to carry on that for long term. So my question is, because what I felt, we need to recruit more permanent employees in those government organizations. Like they have 5, we need probably 20 more, and that should be integrated within the national budget and creating jobs, recruiting and permanent people, and then you train those people. My question is, I could not see anything in your presentation how you're going to empower those national organizations through bringing permanent employees, not those $50 million goes to different NGOs and private organizations, 10-year project, but ultimately those who are going to remain there for 40 years, they lack human resources. So what's your take on that? Thank you.
Right, that's a very good point you raised, and one of the reasons for that, you'll see actually any of our project is actually quite long-term project. It's not a short-term project. Our minimum year is actually 7 years to 10 years, and if you go to other projects, maybe those are actually 3 years to 2 years. So the reason actually to bringing this 7 years project or 10 years project, and as I said, the concessionality side of it, we can go up to 40 years tenure. So that means actually to create a market, to create a long-term sustainability slowly and gradually. So through a project, you can hire someone maybe 7 years or 10 years, but as a government commitment, if you cannot actually recruit them permanently, it actually fails the country ownership. So that's again actually one of the investment criteria we have very strongly, that if you want to have a GCF project, you need to make sure that there is a country ownership is there. And then the need to be also come from the country. So we don't actually prescribe from the top, it needs to come from the bottom. And any of our projects require a co-financing. So you cannot just get that's not a mandatory, but we require some co-financing whenever a project actually we give to the country. Either it could be in-kind contribution or it could be in cash contribution. And part of that process, we think that government should actually provide those kind of commitment that how they could actually have a long-term stuff on there. But the reality is that, and in the government side, you train 10 people. I mean, that's from my experience, I'm saying that I trained 13 people in one of the Meta offices. None of them work there. So they are actually all in the other developed countries because they got the new skill set and you cannot stop them because it's a globalization. So, but you need to keep carry on those continuation. You cannot just stop in one project. So how actually you keep going on that kind of momentum that, okay, 10 people trained, 5 people gone, additional 5 people should be trained, keep training, and those need to be through the government. I don't think that actually only just project-based financing will be able to keep continuation of those kind of things. And that's why I said it's not absolutely true that project ends, everything ends. There is a project we developed in 2004. Still, those are actually using by the national government financing because government as well as community or the local government need to find the value proposition that, okay, this is a value proposition for us. So if you Google like a high-X rice produced country, sorry, high-X rice produced province in Indonesia and Philippines, you'll see it's Indramayu and it's Dumangas in Iloilo. So I did a project in 1998 El Nino, the biggest El Nino in the region. And we did a project which finished in 2002. And if you go there, it's still actually the local government is actually financing those projects by themselves because they see the value to become a high-X rice produced province. And because of the high-X rice produced province, the mayor actually get the presidential award. And that's why they're able to allocate an additional budget through the local government to keep sustaining those things. At a certain point, once you actually get a maturity, it's not actually enough money necessary for keep continuation of those activities, as long as you have a little bit commitment. And if you can actually create that kind of enabling environment, you can actually see a long-term sustainability. And that's why the paradigm shift in our project is quite necessary when you actually design. And sometimes it takes quite a long time to design such kind of things because it's not so easy to bringing from the government that kind of commitments so fast.
Thank you. I'm going to hold off on the questions for a minute because we'll have some more Q&A. But what I wanted to do right now is just to invite Virginia Murray up with Bapon. We've got some seats on the other side of the pillar. The room's divided by a pillar for those of you on the internet. So, just to have a little bit of a discussion. So, Bapon, thank you so much for taking us through and navigating what is quite a complex financing world out there. But we also have Virginia Murray here, who is the Head of Global Disaster Risk Reduction at the UK Health Security Agency, and she's also an honorary professor here at the Risk and Disaster Reduction Department at UCL. She is an expert in public health and disaster medicine, and she has worked on the knowledge and partnerships and capacity development of the 2015 Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, the Sustainable Development Goals, and of course the Paris Agreement on Climate Change. And so both of them, I thought, had a rather extraordinary experience of working at a very high level on warning. So I thought it'd be interesting to listen into perhaps a conversation between them about some of the questions and challenges that they're finding around warnings globally. So I think one of you has, I think Virginia, you need to take this microphone. So if you want to take a seat over there, and perhaps we can go for like 10-15 minutes and then we'll do a Q&A. Thank you.
Is that all right? Can you see us? Great. Bapon, that's an amazing talk you gave.
Thank you, Virginia.
I think it was just incredible. I cannot believe how these billions of dollars roll off your tongue. It's just incredible. So the Green Climate Fund is really something that has made a huge difference to many of the low and middle income countries, particularly in trying, as we're here, in understanding how we do early warning. No. Can you give me your favorite case example of what made the difference?
Well, I think I can talk.
Okay, sorry, you've got that. You're still mic'd, sorry.
I mean, there is a no shortage of actually experiences that we have. So when we went to, say, for an example, in Africa, in Rwanda last year, we saw actually that the farmers is actually telling how actually they're actually having their agriculture is going on, and then how the more climate friendly or climate resilience actually infrastructure they have using solar to reduce the emission, at the same time the production into their field, and also a market creation so that actually the farmers can actually sell their product with the right price and right commodities. So those are the very good example we always receive. If you look at even for the water sector, Barbados is one of the seed countries and quite vulnerable to flooding as well as water security issues. But using our project, actually, they're able to showcase that how a small island country could reduce their non-revenue water loss, creating a water security, and supporting to their most vulnerable community to access to water at 24/7. So these are actually quite good examples we see quite often, and a storytelling from the countries articulated either in newspaper or through our partners or other entities that really gives us that, yes, what we are doing actually having some impact, having some benefit to our most vulnerable communities.
So Bhavon, I love these ideas of these case studies. Do you remember when we were working to deliver the Sendai framework, we found it really important to be able to share case studies, to try and influence UN member states, to try and make sure that science could be usable and used, and in the heart of the Sendai framework. You did an incredible case study about Bangladesh. How would you, with the Green Climate Fund, have changed that case study to what you did then? Because there you showed that monitoring of river levels and the levels of the rivers could influence how you manage the farming and other issues.
Right. I mean, obviously, I'm from Bangladesh as well, so always my heart actually there, even though I'm based in New Zealand. So the flood forecasting system that Bangladesh used, that also actually I had a lot of contribution to design and developing those 1 to 10 days flood forecasting, and that's become an operational model for the countries. And that was my master's thesis actually. So just to tell you that. So and then the impact that we saw in the community, that how actually the farmers getting benefit using a 10 days forecast for early harvesting or late planting, or mobilizing their important goods to a safer place. It's a quite enthusiastic case study we created back in 2013. Last year, actually, GCF mobilized $80 million to Bangladesh, 2 projects. One is actually for the drought, because in the northeastern part, there is a huge drought-prone areas, and they mostly use the groundwater. And we try to promote facilities so that actually how they could actually more dependent on the surface water, utilize the surface water, but also reduce the emission, changing those diesel plant to a solar plant. And at the same time, we also given another project in the coastal areas to making a coastal community resilience through livelihood, alternative practices, agriculture, as well as other innovative crop introduction. There is a pipeline also in a project to enhancing the flash flood forecasting system into the country, because we cover the riverine flood, because Bangladesh is quite dynamic in terms of tidal flooding, river flooding, flash flooding, and urban flooding nowadays. So this project we are trying to design on the flash flood systems, especially on the Sylhet or Har areas, which is very unique, also quite a small group of island, to how actually we can actually combine the flash flooding together with the tidal as well as storm surge together, because it's quite dynamic. It's actually coastal inundation forecasting. It's not only just flash flood forecasting for the atmospheric process. So hopefully that could mature in over this year or next year, so that actually they could able to have more advanced forecasting system. But just to tell you that still Bangladesh could be one of the example countries, especially for the storm forecasting, cyclone forecasting, as well as flood forecasting, maybe a champion in the region with a low tech, how they're actually able to mobilize people and sensitize people in a short amount of time.
Yes, the work you've done in Bangladesh to make sure there are safe places to go to with these schools raised above the floodplains has been a brilliant achievement.
Yeah.
And that was a very practical achievement and really very good example of mitigation, of how you managed it. But if we were to look at the UN for this year, the UN is looking at glaciers. This is the big year for glaciers. And one of the things that we have is that the wonderful Himalayan glaciers are not quite so, are much more vulnerable these days. How are we going to manage that? And do we need to think much more clearly about describing the hazards that might occur? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, in our portfolio, mountain was quite less, to be frank. And mountain ecosystem also very complex. It's not so easy. And then as we depend on the partner to bring our project, so we don't have much control actually which is coming and which is not coming. But you maybe saw in the COP29, we actually announced a partnership on a glacier project, which is the highest amount of money that we actually committed, a total $3.5 billion project for Central Asia, Caucasus, as well as West, as well as Pakistan actually included there. So this is actually to look at actually how this glacier is impacting through the climate. And it's actually quite also multi-sectoral, because when you're talking about the glaciologists only look at actually climatology versus glaciology, and then they actually forecast that, okay, how much is actually glacier going to be melting over the next 50 years or 100 years with the different RCP or climate scenarios. But again, actually, if you say that, okay, with the 8.5 RCP, the Central Asia would be 69% of the glacier will be melting. But then if you live in a Tajikistan, in a small community next to the river, what does it mean to you? Nobody knows. So that means your glaciology needs to be connected with your hydrodynamics and hydrology to tell you the water balance, that, okay, what is actually impacting to the overall water resource management. So we actually initiated a scientific study to understand actually how those glacier melting will be contributing to each of those river basin, so that actually we can actually come up with some practical intervention over the future, that whether Tajikistan need a reservoir or Tajikistan need a canal or they need a hydropower, so that the investment actually goes to the right track. And once those are actually done, we'll be able to see, you can see actually that kind of project. And similarly for the Hindu Kush and Himalaya, we see a great commitment actually by Her Majesty the Queen of Bhutan. She took a leadership role actually to bringing all the head of the state from the Hindu Kush Himalaya to how actually to come up with a commitment, because it requires a political commitment, not only just project level commitment. So how actually the head of the state actually make a declaration and commitment, because this climate change is actually impacting to the glacier, and how they need to be actually upfront to supporting those kind of mechanisms. So hopefully as a glacier year of 2025, we can see a lot of this kind of commitment this year in the UNGA, and we may see actually a lot of other projects and initiatives by other governments.
So I think that's incredibly exciting, your achievements there, Bapon, and along with the Green Climate Fund and the thinking of the Bhutan and the whole of the Hindu Kush network is just so important. But if we were to think of what else is happening in 2025, we have the Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction. And one of the things that you have been so good to work on with me has been the updating of the United Nations Office of Disaster Risk Reduction and International Science Council hazard information profiles, which we think are absolutely critical to having a terminology to be able to describe what these hazards are. And I think the exciting bit is that we're including the multi-hazard context this time. Do you think this will help with some of the Green Climate Fund issues that you've been talking about?
Yeah, as I just mentioned, actually, it's quite resonant that what I just mentioned about the risk assessment, because we often actually do hazard assessment and we say actually it's a risk assessment. And then in the overall risk framework, the hazard is actually quite critical part, because you're looking at the climate indices, and based on the climate indices, you're actually creating what is actually your climate hazard. And based on the hazard, you try to look at actually where it actually exposing, and then what is my element at risk are actually vulnerable. And then using this combination of this hazard, exposure, and vulnerability, you're actually trying to understand your overall risk. So if you are actually not understanding or underestimating or overestimating your hazard, you're actually making a biggest mistake on your risk assessment. And in that sense, actually, the terminology, vocabulary, definition of hazard is quite important. Just giving an example, a landslide. I mean, we have also an expert here on landslide. So it could, a landslide could come as a, geological family, or it could also a hydromet family. So if a geologist actually start thinking about the landslide, they will be looking at more on the soil characteristics and the cliff angle and all sort of things. But if you just consider as a hydromet, you're only looking at the rainfall pattern, that how actually that actually impacting. But if you understand these are actually a both side hazard, then you actually cover actually all the initial and boundary condition when you're actually trying to understand the hazard itself. So that's the beauty of having such kind of definition, so that actually anyone actually trying to understand it has actually quite detailed description of the hazard, even also who are the expert entity or mandated entities, so they can actually reach out and get those information for risk assessment.
I think that's really helpful, Bapon. So if we were to say that we've got the Green Climate Fund and you want to do proper risk assessments, and you think about the fact that we've got the hazard information profiles, do you think the new UNDRR, WMO and UNDP project on loss and damage tracking system, which is being launched soon, I believe, from UNDRR and other colleagues, do you think this will help to support your work to link that? Because I know that the hazard information profiles will be very much a baseline inside it. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, absolutely. I mean, for us, the risk assessment is a core and fundamental. And I didn't mention in my talk that when we actually accept a concept note in our portfolio, so once you submit a concept note, if you see this is a really good idea, we actually give a $1.5 million PPF support, which is like a project preparation fund. So that fund is actually used for climate risk assessment, feasibility study for the infrastructure, environmental safeguard, gender assessment, indigenous peoples plan, economic and efficiency assessment, all those necessary assessment that could ensure the concept into a full package to implementation. And so that kind of money is already there upfront in the market. So, and we actually always try to see a good thorough assessment actually done by the consultant or the entity whom they actually engage to doing those kind of assessment for us. And then the climate risk assessment is very critical to making a decision, yes, go or no go decision. And we always also suggest them actually they should use those standards, those are available to when actually do their risk assessment.
Bapon, I think this is really important thinking and very exciting work. And I know that a lot of this will be shared at the Global Platform in June in Geneva. So by bringing this together and bringing all the links across, I think it's vital that we share this type of information as widely as we can. Oh. Having you here, to me, is really vital, Corinna. Having Bapon here, having him to come and explain to the audience here, many of whom I suspect are very senior professors, but also master students, you need to know that this is a real opportunity for us all to have this friendship and to have this partnership and this opportunity. But should we be turning to questions on the internet or from the audience? Because I don't think I should have the privilege of talking to you only, Bapon. It should be all of us.
Thank you so much. It was lovely to hear your conversation. So thank you so much. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just take a couple of questions online. And what I'll do is I'll go this side so that I'm with Bapon. Sorry, this pillar's very annoying. So we've got a question here from, we'll take a few online and then some in the room, and then hopefully we can get through them all. So thank you from Bajabi. So thank you very much. That was brilliant and very useful. You briefly touched on the financial viability of climate adaptation projects in your experience. Are these early warning systems proving to be a more financial viable mechanism in resilience building?
of course it is.
Oh, no, you got
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, as also I mentioned, actually, still we don't see that kind of bankable project into the early warning systems. And I think it's quite early stage. Many of our early warning project is actually trying to enhance 0 to 1. So who are actually doesn't have anything, how can actually we have something so that they have actually a basic infrastructure. But then whoever has some of the advanced system, how can actually that goes to a more commercialization or more actually a bankable project or more a business case scenario that could actually develop, because you cannot actually jump from 1 to 10 at a time. So you have to, it's an evolving system and it needs to be step by step. And that's why we are trying to more emphasizing the country who actually have a more advanced system, how that could be more robust. The country who doesn't have anything, how can they have actually basics instead of, it's like a more customized need-based solution we like to provide. And it may take time.
Thank you. So the second question online from an anonymous attendee, this might be a tricky one. I understand the GCF mainly works with government counterparts at the national level, but are you also exploring how to strengthen early warning systems at the city and neighborhood level?
No, we don't actually work at that level ourselves. But when a project actually designed, the project is actually for the most vulnerable people. So that need to be embedded. And that is embedded in every single project, actually, that from the national government or through the entity, it normally works. But also we have a separate stream. You will see, actually, if you just search with LLA, locally led adaptation. So that's our different stream. And we have a fundamental target we need to achieve over the next 3 years, that this number of locally led adaptation has been done. As I lead the water project or many of the early warning project, these are all actually locally led, and we try to creating a quite market opportunity at the local level. So locally led adaptation done by local community through the local government. So these are always embedded. But GCF not only work with the government or the national bank, we also have a lot of private entity. So we have a public sector project, we also have a private sector project. I lead the public sector project, but we have a different department, it's called PSF. So many of the private entity, they do actually the private sector project, and those are mostly the mitigation project.
That kind of leads into another question online. So we've got Shet Tamang from Save the Children International asking, what is GCF's plan to finance anticipatory action? Which is a real zeitgeist at the moment, which as someone who works in the volcano world is our bread and butter. But yes, there's a good question for you there.
I think we have several projects with World Food Program, and many of our early warning project is, as I said, that our vision is actually how you create a risk-based decision making. So maybe that's like a specific terminology used, actually, anticipatory action. So all the WFP project is actually they're named as a early warning for early action or early warning for anticipatory action. But in the anticipatory action project, we like to see actually more robust locally led adaptation project that actually they try to bring into the market. There are many anticipatory action, you'll see that actually forecast-based financing and others. So we are trying to see more actually more robust locally led adaptation that could be more sustainable or that could actually bring the community more resilience, that kind of programming. But this is embedded on most of the early warning project.
Thank you. One last one online, so get ready for those of you in the room who want to ask a question. I'll come around with the microphone. But here we've got another anonymous attendee saying, Bapon spoke about the need for early warning systems to be end-to-end and result in early action. And there was a comment about the lack of capacity in NHMSs and a focus on physical sciences, monitoring and forecasting. How does GCF ensure funding is going to support the social sciences and other skills needed to support early warning systems that work for the most at risk and result in early action?
I think that also cover, if you look at the 6 principles that we use, it's a very, very robust indicator you have to come up with, because if you want to make sure that your programming is actually climate action, or it create an impact, it create an paradigm shift, it create a need-based solution, country ownership and efficiency and effectiveness, you actually need to bring all those elements into one platform to design such kind of things. And otherwise, you'll not be able to meet those 6 principles or 6 metrics that we actually try to follow. So those are very fundamental for any single project in GCF.
Thank you. Brilliant. We will come back to questions online shortly, but if anyone in the room has a question, please pop your hand up and I will bring the microphone round so that those online can hear your question. So here we go. Please say your name and where you're from so that we can get to know who you are and your background. Thank you.
Shall I stand up? My name is Na. I'm from RDR, and I'm a master's student on disaster risk and resilience. I've got 2 questions, if that's okay. The first is the international level. I'm very interested in one of your slides in different pipelines talking about early warnings for all initiative. There are several financing mechanisms, including CROWS, SOF, and also GCF. Is there any coordinating mechanisms that avoid overlapping of these countries and avoid any heavy investment into one country or some region balance, country balance and region balance? Because you said that is project-based and country-based. This is the first question, international level, to working with other financing mechanisms. The second question is that at the national level, one of the professors raised that question is the capacity of these developing countries. They have, for example, for hydrological departments or met services, they're very low level departments, government in their system. So how to guarantee that investment that goes into that right departments, this weak departments comparing with other large ministries, so that they can achieve the target for early warnings for all, because they are the major players, but weak departments in their own government. Thank you.
I think that's a very good question that you raised, both of them. So first of all, that always our, when we actually distribute our project, we look at the regional balance, country saturation, and as well as per capita, how much actually country is accessing. So those are always actually looked at as a priority. We don't want to see actually too much programming in one country, then no programming in other countries. So we try to always look at who are our underserved country, and as well as we try to balance the coordination mechanism. And that's why you saw that when we mapped, we try to understand actually who is doing what and how we can actually leverage others instead of reinventing the wheel. So that is actually quite important, so that if the SOF is actually financing somewhere, we shouldn't actually overfinance over there and other things. So rather than we can actually take a leverage of those activities. Or if the country already have an early warning project, do we need to have actually same early warning project in that country, rather than we actually focus on different area or try to find the gaps that what is actually missing and what additionality is required. So that is quite important. And then on your second question, I think I already. Yeah, when we design the programming, we work with our accredited entity. So our partner who actually bringing the projects to mapping those things. And every single project is actually through a stakeholder consultation. So that means when it comes to GCF, it needs to be guaranteed that that has been discussed and consulted with the partners and ongoing initiatives. So if you just open a GCF proposal, you'll see actually there is a whole list of ongoing project is actually there in any country in that particular time when it comes to GCF. So that gives you a quite good understanding actually what they try to leverage in the country. But as a thought leader, we also understand actually what is happening in the countries. When it comes to us, we actually say why actually you need these things when you have actually 5 other activities are similar type. So that quite heavily reviewed by the project team member. On the second question, I already answered you on that, you need to look at what is their bandwidth and then actually design the project based on their bandwidth. Because as I said, that if you have say, I'm just giving an example for one particular country, they have a maintenance budget of $40,000 per year. And that $40,000 is actually used for electricity, entertainment, as well as, maintaining their current observation network. So the country wants a Doppler radar. Obviously, a Doppler radar would be quite beneficial for the country to understanding more, high accuracy forecasting system. But a Doppler radar has an annual maintenance cost of $100,000. So who's gonna pay that $100,000 after the project completion? So if you don't have that money allocated from the government, it would be like just an infrastructure as a statue for no use. So that means when you're designing your national programming, you need to first look at actually what is your absorption capacity and how much you can actually achieve. And you need to be very realistic actually when you're designing such kind of programming. Because otherwise, as we said, that if that is not realistic, it may show in a short period of time, but it will fail at the longer sustainability point of view. Does that help? Okay.
Okay, who else has got a question? We've got one here. Anywhere else? Question? Okay, so we take these last three, and there we go.
Thanks. Sahil Shah, Tipping Frontier. I was curious about the private financing and what models and frameworks that you use to evaluate effectively the economic return for the early warning systems. I guess beyond the, moving transportable assets. I'm curious what other, financial returns that you're able to model where benefits accrue to the private sector, and then sort of how you syndicate finance, whether that's from local banks, microfinance, et cetera. That'd be interesting to understand, and also how that's broken down by hazard type.
Right. In general, we have a very standard guidelines for economic and financial assessment. So you'll try to look at one is actually what are the economic benefit you're bringing into the society, and at the same time, what kind of financial benefit you're actually bringing in terms of revenue generation opportunity or profit into the private funding. So these are two standard methods we normally use when you do any economic and EFA assessment, financial and economic assessment. For the private financing, it comes as a co-financing in our framework. So we like to see if you invest $1, how much actually other finance could be bring into that particular programming or project to share the money. And there's no hard line for guidelines for if I invest $1, you have to invest $1. That's not kind of principle, because one size doesn't fit all. So it's based on the very much context into the country, that how the country situation, how the country condition, and what are the status of these things. Sometimes we can go fully 100% grant. Sometimes we can go, okay, ratio is like a 1:1. If you pay $1, I can pay you $1. Sometimes like if you invest $5, I can only invest $1. So it's quite varies on the project context as well as activities and countries' absorption capacity.
Hello, I'm Anna. I'm a PhD student at the Department for Risk and Disaster Reduction here at UCL. I have two questions, sorry. First one is, considering your focus on climate, do you also finance any projects that have maybe early warning systems for other hazards, such as earthquakes, tsunamis, for example, as part of multi-hazard early warning system, or just climate? Mm-hmm. And second, you mentioned low-tech forecasting and warning, and I would love to hear a bit more about that if it's possible. Thank you.
Right. We often actually look at the multi-hazard context, but we never directly funded anything just for earthquake early warning systems. But if you look at the 10 principles that we shared, out of 10 principles, maybe 2 or 3 is actually quite specific, but others could be shareable. So those are actually whole common for any other hazards. So that's how actually try to contribute. But as this is a climate financing, mostly it need to be look at actually what kind of climate action our financing is bringing. And that's why actually sometimes you require a co-financing, because you cannot just do the climate action without development. These are like, embedded system, right? So how can actually we blend this together? So if you want to make a horizontal infrastructure, you need to provide those kind of basic financing, and then to making that infrastructure more resilient, climate resilience, you can actually top up those using our money. So that's what all the climate finance need to be act on. And in terms of a low-tech technology, I think some of the country, if you look at them, I mean, especially in the Asia, like Philippines or Indonesia and even in Bangladesh, they actually have not very sophisticated systems. Like, even in Bangladesh, they don't maybe use like emergency alert systems, which you use maybe here in UK or in New Zealand. They may use like, very traditional systems using HF radios or other things. And those are very low maintenance, but actually quite effective. You may, even if you go to the Fiji, a small island, they don't have those kind of fancy warning dissemination, but we saw actually with a storm warning, they're able to actually evacuate a large amount of population in a short period of time. And those are actually very low-tech operation, which has less maintenance, but highly effective. We also saw, people use like in Thailand, they use like a fire to alert people. Sometimes they use like a bamboo, bell, or sometimes they use a church or other mosque, those kind of things. So there are actually many warning dissemination process. You just need to map out that how you can actually utilize all those in an effective way, so that actually none of those goes like underutilized or unutilized. So you actually find out which could be used for which purpose and when. If one system fails, another system or backup system is there.
That's a really good point. Obviously, when technology fails, it's good to have the redundancy there. So our final question from the floor. Thank you for being so patient.
Hello, my name is Abhay Chowdhury. I'm a consultant at Mott MacDonald. So thank you, Bapon. You have given a very good insight to what GCF expects from the old applicants, fund applicants. So I've got one question. You briefly mentioned about the loss and damage model. So how critical GCF is in terms of when you evaluate a proposal? How critical, say for example, someone is applying for an early warning system. And obviously the damage and loss model could give you huge damage, which maybe in turn is a huge benefit. Whereas the investment in early warning system is relatively low compared to the benefits you are claiming or anyone is claiming, because there may be other physical interventions associated with that. So I'm just wondering, when you evaluate a proposal, do you see it, is it really very critical how much benefits this can bring in?
Not actually, because loss and damage fund is actually completely separate than the GCF financing. And if you look at the loss and damage fund, is maybe more like a sort of emergency financing, like right after any disaster. So we don't have any sort of relationship, first of all, and not even a comparison or contrast between their financing and our financing and how that could be utilized. But still, we are working as a secretariat at this moment, interim secretariat for loss and damage fund. But some of the tools that they are developing, that actually quite beneficial for us as well. So that's what I try to reflect in my talk, that if we have a very robust loss and damage financing, that could actually give us a better understanding that what kind of really climate impact you can bring. Because at this moment, the way the climate impact actually measures into the IPCC is actually in the mitigation side is how many metric ton of emission you're reducing. Into the adaptation is actually how much beneficiary you are actually covering. And I don't think that's like a right definition of the impact. The impact could be also secondary level. Actually, you actually make the school resilience, you make actually the community infrastructure resilience. So how can actually we measure those kind of element? We cannot do that because we don't have a data. And because of the lack of data, actually, we don't able to calculate such kind of things into more quantitative way. And hopefully that once that, the WRSR or the loss and damage database is actually quite mature, it could enable everyone, not only GCF, I think every development organization could actually have an opportunity to really quantify the damage versus loss versus, what is the potential, benefit it would bring. At this moment, only the insurance sector do those kind of things. What is the optimum kind of loss? Yeah.
Right, we've got 3 questions left online, but we're going to do they're all quite related. So let's do a quick short fire round, 1 minute. So first one, feasibility infrastructure studies are way costlier if we are mobilizing hundreds of millions. Could GCF fund more than 1.5 million?
We cannot answer those things. We need to look at actually what are the proposal, what are the climate action, what are the paradigm shifts, how that actually fit into the within the GCF investment criteria, and then based on that, we can define actually what is other finances bringing and what really the country need GCF financing. More often, actually, we need to look at actually why you need a GCF financing. You need to justify. So if you need even if you need a $10 million, you need to justify that why actually GCF need to come and contribute that $10 million. Why not other financing? So as long as it justifies that, yes, this is the reason that GCF need to be financed, and if it is a fit with the GCF framework as well as investment criteria, and then if it's fulfilled, we can actually design together, and then ultimately decision by the board whether it's approved or not approved.
Thank you. Whilst the World Bank project design process takes an average of 3 years, you mentioned that GCF has projects designed in as little as 6 months. What enables GCF to shorten the approval process so significantly, and how is this achieved?
Yeah, so over the last 1 year, actually, we are quite hardly working together with our partner that how can we reduce the process. So now we have a process in place that if a concept note comes to our pipeline, we need to be responding that within 6 weeks. So as a team leader, I need to be responsible to review those things, provide feedback within the 6 weeks time frame. That's a hard deadline. And then once we provide that feedback, then we actually give the $1.5 million, up to $1.5 million PPF grant to design the full package. And that full package needs to be developed within the 6 months period of time. And then it can then come to the GCF again to review and then place it to the board. So on an average, it takes 1 year, 2 months sometimes. But we also have a certain case where if our partner is very enthusiastic and we do the co-design together, and it could reduce those kind of back and forth. Often it takes like you send a concept note, we review, we send you a 20-page comments in a 12-page concept note, and you say, oh my goodness, what is happening with these people? And then you work another 6 months to incorporate all the comments, and you send it to me, and then I send another 10-page comments. So then you get frustrated again, and then you take another 6 months. So you see the time goes so fast. So we try to reduce those kind of things. We do more like a co-design approach, that if you have an idea, we said, okay, if you have an idea, hold on, just, let's discuss together. And then if we agree on the principles and then criteria, activity and outcomes and output, you can actually then go back to your drawing board and design, write the concept note once you agreed on those theory of change, which is like a fundamental core heart of a GCF concept note.
Now, the beginning part of that answer sounded exactly like working in academia, like very long time scales, lots of comments. So, but thank you, that's great to see. And then the last question kind of builds on that by saying, it's great that GCF's efforts to simplify its process and accreditation is wonderful. However, it seems that the majority of financing option goes to large UN agencies or few powerful actors. Could you share how GCF intends to balance funding across a wider range of organisations, particularly humanitarian organisations such as Save the Children or national NGOs, so that access to financing is more equitable for all accredited entities?
So as mentioned that we work through our partner, and anybody is eligible to apply for an accreditation. Save the Children is our accredited entity. I think they're the only NGO at this moment, and also WWF. So, but more and more we see actually a demand from the country to directly access the money. So which is actually many of the national bank or private bank into the national entity are actually getting more accredited. And then that also our priority in our GCF2, as you saw in our list, that how can actually we can mobilize the financing more directly to the country. So that's also our target. But at this moment, the UN presence in every country, and they are also our accredited entity. They're bringing project to us. That's all.
Brilliant. Thank you, Bapon. I feel like you've been in the firing line, so thank you so much. Thank you everyone for your questions online and in person. We appreciate it. Thank you, Bapon, for taking so many questions. Clearly lots of interest here and wanting to take the opportunity of you being here. Virginia, thank you also for hosting the conversation. So just a little bit of
thank you so
something
much.
with our very famous mugs that are brilliant, I have to say. So please enjoy those. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you to Amanda for helping to organise, for our film crew for helping making this hybrid. We will be getting this up on our YouTube channel shortly if you wanted to watch any of it again or capture a few things. We do have future events, so please do follow us on social media for our upcoming calendar. We've got some exciting things lined up, so keep an eye out. And then finally, unfortunately for those online, you won't be able to join us, but for those of you in person, we do have a reception upstairs, so please go up the stairs to reception, turn right when you see the entry gate, go through the wooden doors, continue through the glass doors, and at the end you will find a room full of nibbles, canapes and drinks. So please do take the opportunity to chat, network, and enjoy the next hour or so. And if you can, get a word in with Bapon, who I'm sure is a very well-deserved drink. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for coming.